I was doing a little bit of research into, obviously, I've followed your Instagram, and that's how we connected over Instagram. And then I had a little look at your sort of career, and I noticed that you had a couple of MMA fights. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I went out to Oregon, and they had a pretty like loosely put together amateur scene. Like it was a lot of fights. Uh, but it was kind of interesting. There was a couple of fights I showed up to that had no like weigh-ins.
Oh,
Like,
really?
like yeah, like they told us we were gonna weigh in, and I cut weight, but I never went to a scale, you
Mm.
know. And then there was funny. There was sometimes like they would pick up like guys out of that were getting out of jail, and they picked those guys up and gave them like a free hotel and like a casino coupon, and that was like great for them to be into get into a fight, have a free place to stay, and have like a $30 casino coupon. Or
When?
like when this was like 2000, let me turn my phone down. This was 2004,
Okay.
maybe. Yeah. I was
So,
like when,
it's an amount of time ago.
yeah, it was a long time ago. Feels like it.
Well, that's so I was born in 2002, so that's 2 years after I was born. So,
Yeah, I moved out to Oregon around I think 2003.
okay.
So yeah, that's like I decided I wanted to fight at that point in my life. And
Okay.
I had to get, and I was in Charleston, South Carolina. That's where I am now. And there's nothing here. There was like a purple belt that taught. He was good. He just didn't really care about what he was teaching, and like it was kind of like really mixed bag of like what you're getting. And I kind of was getting out of the idea of like I was like always drinking and partying. I had like a lot of like rebellious friends, and I was getting in trouble, getting arrested. I don't know if I was getting arrested. I was getting put in handcuffs, but I was never like formally going to trial like for
Just
things.
like restrained and that
Yeah,
sort
yeah. So I mean, you're a Southern boy. So if you're a Southern boy, you probably, they kind of like rough you up, treat you like shit, and then let you out the next morning.
of.
And I kept getting in trouble, and I was like thinking, like, man, I got to figure something out. I think I really like fighting. Like, I think that's what my problem is like I'm drinking to go out and fight, and I know this
Mm.
about myself. And so I had to do, and then I had a friend that was doing jujitsu at the time, and we would fight in the front yard all the time. Like we'd parties, drinks, and we fight in the front yard, and like it was like all challenger step up kind of thing. I was just getting mauled by him, like choked out, rear naked choke, taken down. And from then on, I think every single day I trained jujitsu with him. And then I finally ended up going to classes. I was like, I want more of this, like so just catapulted from there and pretty much sent myself to the opposite end of the country.
And did that stop you from getting in trouble with the law and all of that sort of
Yeah,
stuff?
for most of it. I mean, I mean, there was like one or two times that Oregon has a much nicer policy on drunks. But like when I drank, it was like more uh like I wasn't drinking partying all the time. Like I would be like, oh, well, let's do this one time. And that one time, of course, I would get into a fight or something would happen, and then they put you like in a drunk tank and they let you out. They give you a bunch of soup, and stuff like that. So it was like, yeah, and so maybe there was like maybe one or two mistakes that I made, but basically I wanted to be as good at MMA as possible. I wanted to be better than everybody that I was training with. And I couldn't do that going out and partying and do this like because drinking would destroy me for 2 or 3 nights, 2 or 3 days.
Mm.
And there was no way I could keep up with the guys that were in the gym if I was catching up like that. So it became where I haven't drinking since I opened up my academy in Charleston, just because I know that I could drink too much, but it's not worth me fighting somebody, or me getting into a fight. Like
And
so,
do you feel like when you drink, because for me, if I have a drink, like I can get really, really drunk and just end
yeah,
up just sort of chewing someone's ear off in the corner,
yeah,
just chatting
yeah,
away,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know? I never get violent or anything. I just get tired, really. But do you feel like the opposite of that, or
No, I just feel like maybe I'm just more of I'm annoyed at certain things, like, and I'm more vocal about it even sober.
Hmm.
So like, like somebody does something ridiculous. Like just recently I was in Europe and I had my coffee on a stand and this guy sat down. This dude blows his nose into a handkerchief, like or into a napkin, like bad, like a big one, and then he puts his trash of his handkerchief right next to my cup of coffee. And I was like, whoa, what? Hey, no, 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 no. You're gonna put that in your pocket. Like so like stuff like that. Like I'm not gonna let like I'm a little bit more outspoken and it kind of like hits me like that. I'm like, I gotta tell this guy stop. And if you do that with other drunk people,
it
it's
gets out of hand very
yeah.
quickly? Yeah.
Yeah, somebody like does something stupid or something you're like, hey, that guy's drunk, then all of a sudden it's an argument and then fights happen pretty quickly when it's when you call somebody out over something small. So,
Yeah, especially once you've had a few drinks and you're out on a night out, and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, definitely. So that was kind of how you got into martial arts. And what age was that?
I mean, I would say so 18, 19. 19 was like when I got into involved in it. Like I was like, this is what I want to do. This is the other like everything else is masking my actual passion of like combat, you know. So I I started training. Like I wasn't serious probably until 20, like really serious, like where I was like, I'm not I'm not I'm not partying anymore. I'm not this like I have a direction in my life. I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna fight. That was kind of 20 was the in my head.
And so you was your first martial arts session at 18?
My first fight
Your first martial arts session, by the first time.
session was no, so I would say 19. I think 19 was like the first time I went to a class. 18 was like when I was training in with my buddy. Like I was constantly training with my buddy in the like we went upstairs. It was funny. Like after he beat me up, I was like he came over every single day and we would wrestle and do jujitsu upstairs. And I would be bleeding out of my like elbows and knees. So I would have like t-shirts tied around my elbows and knees, like to stop the blood from getting into the carpets too much as we were like wrestling upstairs. So that was like every single, it got weird. I'm sure people thought it was weird. You know what I mean? Like jujitsu is weird itself. Nobody know what jujitsu was at that point in time. And then there's just two guys wrestling upstairs constantly,
Yeah, people
bleeding,
getting a little
bleeding
bit
on, yeah, bleeding on their elbows and knees.
what have you boys been up to?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's what hooked me, and then finally getting to an organized class, I think was much harder in that time. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't just like it was there, like you could just walk in. It was like, was the coach there? Were their mats down? You don't know what like is they're renting a spot, but they're not really holding classes.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and like I mean for me, I live in a pretty rural area of the UK. But
Mhm.
even for me, within the space of an hour, I could probably get to 15 different gyms within the
That's
space.
wow.
It's crazy, you know?
Yeah.
Whereas obviously 20 years ago, I'm assuming that wasn't the case.
No, it was only a purple belt teaching, like just newly minted purple belt, just teaching. And I mean, the person that was teaching was also getting instruction from or getting belted under a Gracie that was coming in and doing seminars and working maybe with so it's like you're not getting a black belt teaching you your jujitsu. So my purple belts are different than purple belts then. Purple belts were still gods. You
Mm,
know what I mean? Like they were still way better than anybody in the gym. But nowadays, like I don't think people understand the amount of education that they can get in jiu-jitsu that wasn't available like right out and like available to them. Like I didn't learn I didn't learn a lot of my jiu-jitsu from anybody. Like I
Okay.
can't say like oh I had a coach. Like I was doing jiu-jitsu or I was fighting when I left Oregon. I think I was at 4 or 5 years of training, and I can't tell you like where there was like a coach that I can remember taking a class with. So I was in Quest, and at that time, I think Lieben was teaching one of the classes, which I'm actually going to meet up with. It's very, very cool. I just connected with him again. I'm gonna be in San Diego, and I'm meeting up with him at the gym that he teaches at. Uh, and he's one of the guys that taught me one of my first private lessons. So like I took a private lesson from him. He gave me a discount, and this was like a private lesson right before I took a fight, which is ridiculous. You don't do stuff like that. But I remember an omoplata teaching me the omoplata. Other than that, I can't remember really any instruction to where it was like everything I got was offline.
Mm.
Not even offline, was from videos. So I was watching like MMA stuff and trying to figure out how to do stuff. And then basically it was like workshopping constantly. It's like you had an idea of how to do the arm bar, you had an idea of how to do these things, but you were basically workshopping them. And I guess we were the main ecological approach. So everybody that's like talking about the ecological approach, we were the inventors of the ecological approach because we didn't have any friggin' idea what we were doing. So you put us to go, well, hey, you're just going to put your legs and you try to break an arm between your legs. Go. And then you figure it out a little bit better here and there.
I spoke to, do you know a guy called Eric Paulson?
I do.
I spoke to him on the podcast, not the last one I did, but the one prior. Um, Really interesting guy to listen to. And he was talking about like not even just in terms of MMA or jiu-jitsu, but in terms of just anything about how much access we have to information in this day and age. Like I can open up Instagram and learn, or I can see 100 different moves in the space of
Right.
20 minutes, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas for someone like yourself 20 years ago, to learn all of that information is going to take years and years and loads of traveling around. And yeah,
You know
the
what? You know who you should look for? You should look for whoever owned Subfighter. There's something called subfighter.com.
okay.
And that was, so I think the internet, YouTube was around at that point. Because I remember watching Family Guy on YouTube, and I remember watching Kimbo Slice's fight, backyard fight in on YouTube. But they had so Subfighter had all these highlights, right? And then they had free techniques and stuff on there. But then at some point they had a pay site, like where you paid something like $15 or $8. I think it was probably $8, and you got access to more stuff. At some point, I ended up purchasing probably the first subscription plan that you could ever get off online, and it was good stuff. I mean, the guy who, uh, if I click on something, it's not going to take me off the internet, is it? Or off
It
the.
shouldn't do. No, it shouldn't do.
So I'm going to give you the guy's name who was teaching because he fought Andre Galvao
Okay.
in Strikeforce. So he was an MMA fighter, and he gave Andre Galvao. He lost a split decision to Andre,
Mm.
and he was a grappler. So he was. It was. I want to say Luke Stewart. So Luke Stewart. I feel like so Luke Stewart was on that. So yeah, he owned. Uh, yeah, he owned Subfighter, or at least he taught lessons on there. And I remember going and like watching some of that stuff, and that was like the first instruction that I really got. But besides that, I was looking at like so like I would watch Carl Parisian a ton. I would watch the like Diaz and Diego Sanchez and George St. Pierre or BJ Penn. You're watching all these guys and you're trying to figure out what they're doing. Like there's a funny thing that Jeff Coran uh, he messaged me because I mentioned him on another podcast. I learned a mount escape from Jeff Coran watching him fight Matt Serra. Like these are things that I still do today, but you have to do as a coach, but it's a little bit less fun maybe now. Like then it was like you were like MMA was brand new, it's brand new to you, and you're like, oh, these are all new stuff. Like, how are they doing all of this stuff? And now it's more like watching film and studying and waiting for something different to happen. Like it's almost like homework now. It's a lot more like homework. I still have not fully watched the Max Holloway and Ilya Tapora fight. I still think Max is going to win. I'm at round one.
Yeah, just leave it there. Just
I feel
leave.
like yeah, he was picking up. He was doing okay. He was doing all right. I thought we were picking up on the cards.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, that was a sad moment. But
yeah.
yeah, Ilya Topor is a hell of a fighter. But yeah, there's. So do you still enjoy watching MMA itself, or do you just watch fights for analytical purposes now? Do you have the time to watch cards or anything?
So like there's a lot of times where there's just too much going on, like there's too many fights. Um, and then there's just the timing of certain things like where I don't have the same energy I had to watch fights from 6 o'clock to like for us, the fights come the pay-per-view card starts at 10 p.m. and
Okay.
it ends around 1:30 in the morning. So that's like then you go, okay, well, there's a prelims. Well, okay, I can watch the prelims, but those prelims start at 6. So I'm watching from 6 to 1:30. So there's a lot of stuff I miss. And I think I miss a little bit more of it because I now can go back and find it. Like it's not gone. Like once you watch the fight, it was gone. Like you're not going to see that fight for a while. Now it's on like ESPN or it's some torrent site has it or something. You're gonna find it if you need to watch it. Uh, but yeah, I mean, I like, there's certain fights that excite me. Like I'm excited for Islam. I'm excited when I watch an Islam fight. Like uh, I study him a bunch, and it'll be interesting to see how he deals with Arman again. I'm excited for the Merab Devashali fight with Nurmagomedov. Um, those are both really good fights. I mean, sometimes the UFC has been putting on less than great fights, I think.
Yeah, yeah. A few of the past, I think they maybe chose the wrong fight to
Yeah.
put on. Like for me, obviously everyone talks about this one, but like the John Jones Miocic fight, both great fighters, but I just don't feel like that
Yeah.
was the right fight in the right
Yeah.
moment. Um, to headline, it was MSG, wasn't it? Yeah, to headline MSG, it's like just put the Tom fight on, you know.
Yeah.
And they used to do that, but I feel
Yeah.
like
Well,
they're
there's too many fighters now.
mm,
So, I mean, there's half the guy. I mean, there's guys on main cards that I don't know.
yeah.
I mean, this last Colby Covington card, like I actually watched some of that, right?
Mm,
Guys that were on the main card, I had no idea who they were.
mm.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's just odd to me to like, and it's more normal. But like, if I see a pay-per-view card and I don't know who the guys are, and it's a main card on a pay-per-view card, I'm like, I'm not going to ever say that I know the business more than these guys know the business. These guys' job is to know the business. They put the people on that they think are going to be stars. They put the people on that are either going to drive a market, like like an English market, a Chinese market, whatever, or they put on a female fight that they think this woman may be a star at some point. So let's put her in front of people right away. Um, but they're pretty good at their job. That's what they're supposed to do. They're not supposed to have a bunch of boring fights. But
Yeah,
sometimes I'm not interested.
I think the problem is that they have the monopoly.
Yeah,
Whenever you've got that much power, and they have the most power that any company has
yeah,
in MMA, they can afford to mess up a few times and
yeah,
maybe have a couple of years where they aren't producing the fights that everybody wants to see because they've still got the biggest stars, they've still got the biggest name, and you can always pull out a Adesanya fight or a McGregor fight or a Pereira fight, and that kind of brings everyone back in, and they're like, "Oh, the UFC's on again."
yeah.
Um,
But the sad thing is that you go, okay, like there's been four middleweight champions, right? There was Adesanya, Poatan, uh, Strickland, and Duplessis,
Mm.
right? Any of those guys, so Poatan's gone. He's up. He's probably going to stay up. Then you got Izzy, and you got Strickland and Duplessis. I mean, that's just not like any of those fights. I'm not necessarily dying to see those guys fight each other. You
Yeah,
know, and then you go, okay, you got the new Shav. I don't even know how to say his name, Shavkat or Shevkat.
specific.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and so you got him. It's like that's interesting, but is he ready? And then you got Chimaev. I mean, but they're not putting on fights like so. They're not putting on Whitaker and Chimaev was a good fight to put on because it was somebody to actually prove who Chimaev is, right? Because Whitaker's proven. Like he may not be the number one guy, he may not be the world beater that he was, but he's solid as shit. And so you go, okay, well, because Chimaev looked bad. In my opinion, he looked bad against Kamaru Usman. Like with Usman having that little amount of time to be at 185 and to go against Chimaev, it's like, hey, you gassed out against Usman, who Usman was like, if he had gotten ready for that fight, he might have beat you. Like
and if it
that's
was
a
5 rounds as well.
yeah. And so you go, okay, who are you? And then he does a fantastic job of dismantling him. Um, but then you like who's Chimaev gonna fight? What's gonna be interesting? Like I always think personalities make fights, but you can't build a whole personality card.
Yeah,
What I mean? Like you can't say like the fight I'd rather watch would be Shavkat versus Chimaev or Usman or anybody else that's a grappler because that would be the fight that would be the most interesting.
yeah. I mean, the thing is, so there's a couple of good examples. Is for example, Ian Gary when he fought Shavkat.
Yeah,
I love Ian Gary. I like watching him fight. He's the kind of style that I like to watch. Um, but I just assumed that Shavkat was going to walk through him, 5 round decision,
right.
something like that, dominance. And then I hear everybody on Twitter or X going, "Oh, what a great fight! Gary might have been able to win that if he'd landed a few more strikes. It was really close." I was shocked. And then you sometimes get like another good example, Adesanya versus Romero, right?
Right.
Everyone was expecting that to be a hell of a fight, and one of the most boring fights of all time, right?
Ever. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I was trying to be a bit kind, but
No, no,
but
dude. I mean, I think I love Romero, but I think Romero is a complete psycho. Like in his head, I don't think he thought that was a bad fight for him at all. I think he thought he was in the like, and that's a shame on Izzy for not putting a pedal. Like I understand as a dangerous person, but at some point you got to be the guy.
yeah,
But everybody has one, right? You got what's his name had one. Anderson Silva had Maya, and that was awful.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, like it's interesting because maybe it's just I like to see the fights that I like to see. So it's like the last fight that was 100% where I was stoked to see the fight was uh Connor and Khabib.
yeah.
Like that's the last show that was like, holy shit, is this really going to happen?
Yeah.
And that used to happen a lot more often. Maybe because we had less fighters, but like Chuck Liddell versus Randy Couture, Tito versus Randy, Tito versus Chuck. Uh, then you had, Mirko Cro Cop versus Fedor. Like
Yeah.
you had guys that you were pretty sure were the very, very best in the world at that moment that were two unbeatable human beings fighting each other.
But
Um,
Tom Aspinall and John Jones should have been
yeah.
that. That should have been that, but because it's been drawn out and it's been such a long process, there's not gonna be that same hype there because of everything that's led up to it.
I mean, I think the problem is that John Jones runs it. I mean, that's it. Like his contract probably looks different than everybody else's contract.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the UFC has some kind of push on him.
Obviously, a lot of your Instagram content or like TikTok content, whatever, is jiu-jitsu focused. We've
Yeah.
spoken a lot about MMA there. How much is MMA still prevalent in what you teach and what you train versus jiu-jitsu?
So jujitsu, so I started MMA, right? That was my thing. And I did a lot of no gi and stuff like that. I ended up injuring my neck and having to like get neck surgery. The arms didn't work. Like I don't know if you can tell, but like one shoulder drops lower than the other because the
Uh,
scapula doesn't work. It's just weird stuff that neurologically never got fixed. And so I had to stop and I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do with my life. And my coach was like, hey, stick around, learn jujitsu, learn the gi, right? So like I got so obsessed with like not obsessed. I'm one of those people that cannot let other people get ahead of me. I'm feel like I'm racing against time constantly. Um, so no matter what kind of situation I'm in, I'm like, okay, well, that's the next thing I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure I master this. And so I studied the gi like crazy, and the gi made my jujitsu way better. So like when people tell me like, oh well, no gis does the same, like I figured out grips and things like this in the gi that translated to MMA jiu-jitsu way, way better. So I was working with MMA fighters, and I've always kind of worked with MMA guys, and that's kind of been my like I I enjoy gi jiu-jitsu. I teach it well. A lot of things I can come up with in gi, uh, because it's creative. Like if I understand body mechanics, I can I can build from there. You know, um, so a lot of my content's Brazilian Jiu Jitsu because most people are doing Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and that's kind of like where you connect with the most amount of people is in that kind of setting. And I love showing new things and I love seeing new things. Um, but most of my stuff I think translates to MMA, right? So um I work with, so you were talking with Joaquin, right? Who's in my opinion brilliant, right? He's one of the top coaches uh out there. Um and when we get together, we just create shit. It's funny. We just like go into a position like, hey, what would you do here? And we just keep messing around. We filmed some stuff, but it's unfortunately all the stuff we filmed is like dark and black, so we have to refilm it ourselves somewhere else. But um, I, taking what I knew from jujitsu, the amount of body mechanics things that I understand, and applying it to watching the best fighters in the UFC, watching what they're doing, and then taking what they're doing and improving upon it. Like I honestly believe that like I, that there's been improvement. I or people I work with have made improvements upon what Islam, Hamzat, Habib do, because what they're doing is so built into their body that they can do things a little bit off, right? Like you see it like when they throw an armbar on, it looks like that looks like a blue belt doing an armbar, but you know the guy he's doing it on is a black belt.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the triangles, the triangle that Habib hit on, I think it was um Gaethje, was awful in my opinion. But he did it because he's been doing it forever. So he triangled him like it looked like a white belt triangling somebody, but he did it because he's fucking Habib and he's got so much like grappling in his body that that's the way it looks. And a lot of like Russian grapplers kind of look like that a little bit, like they're forcing things. Nothing looks smooth or mechanically sound. They just make things happen, and no matter what, it kind of like clicks, you
Yeah.
know. Um, but watching them, seeing things that they're doing, watching international wrestling, watching all these things, and then taking my understanding of body mechanics and applying certain new things to it and testing it out is that like right now I would say that's my passion right now is working that stuff. And so I'll probably be working more on like, so I still go out and I still work with MMA fighters. I still have my group of MMA fighters at my gym. We're just a small town. That's just one of the issues. And it's it's much harder to get a job. It's much harder to uh, be able to live that fighter lifestyle, like where like you're poor in the town that I'm in. You know what I mean? Like, and then a lot of people just don't understand that fighter lifestyle at all, and they just can't apply themselves like they could. Like, it's like, hey, you don't have to be making ends meet. You could be living with five other people and be making ends meet and be at the gym all the time. So it's also that kind of balance where you get places like California, Florida, other gyms where people are just they're living for that only. They're living in the gym. They're living, like they're living underneath the ring. They're living like in poverty to get to a great to get as much information as they can. Because I lived in poverty from 2008, like when I think like I had no money at all. 2000 no 2006 till 2014 or 15,
Mm.
making no money whatsoever, like making almost nothing just to be around the best people in the world, just to be around, like just to like make. I think I was like after I injured my neck, I was driving the American Top Team school bus to pick up after school kids. I had like a neck brace on. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like that, like those are the things that I was doing. And I lived in a garage, like a garage of like a built up garage that had no kitchen, no nothing, and that's what I was renting out.
Are you seeing less of that kind of mentality in the
Yeah,
modern era?
100%, 100%. If like it's, I mean, it's still out there and it's still around. I think people. So I think the thing is that that mentality is great in big spots.
Mm.
So if you're gonna have that mentality and you're around some of the best people in the world, then that's going to work out. Like always says that that's where you fit in, because other guys that are at a higher level than you are going to like look at you and be like, "Hey, he helped me." Like like this kid, whoever he is, I don't know who he is, but he's been giving me good rounds. I want him to stay here. And so then you kind of get your way in off that pass off of giving guys good enough rounds, and then coaches start looking at you like, "Hey, this guy might be something. Maybe I can put my claws in him and and ride him to the top." Like so there's things like that that happen, but they happen in places like Florida, in places like California, where there's these big gyms. But all you really need, it's not a difficult task to put together an MMA academy like that. You just need the right amount of coach. You need the right amount of coaches that all work together. Then to of course you need an investor. So you need an investor, but you need to make sure that certain fighters that you bring in don't have to work. All they have to do is train, and that's all they have to do. They don't have to work. They're not living the ritzy lifestyle, but that's enough for somebody who wants to be a world champion. Is that you go, hey, we're going to take care of you. You're going to get this stipend amount of money for rent and food, and here's our deal with you. Then you bring six of those guys in. If you bring six qualified dudes like that are already in the UFC, or already fighting in organizations that have where they have titles or where they're title contenders, they're going to attract everybody in that state. Beyond that, they're going to start attracting everybody from everywhere else.
Well, that's what that I've been to a gym called Tiger Muay Thai. I'm assuming you've
Mhm.
heard of this gym.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what they do. Exactly that. They
Yeah.
they pay their fighters of it like not great, but they give them enough
Yeah.
to live and
Yeah.
to train. And then because there's good training partners there, that attracts high level people. Volkanovski, Adesanya, Brendan
Yeah.
Loughnane, Darren Till, like all of these guys have been through Tiger
Yeah.
because of that culture that they have there. And like you say, I mean, you definitely need an investor to do that, and that's what.
It's a simple product, really. And the hard part for the investor is, what does he make? What is he getting out of it?
Mm,
Right. So there's ways to make money off of this, but there's like you better run that gym at a loss.
mm,
But you can run management, you can run dorms, you can run things on the side of it. Because I'm sure Tiger Muay Thai is where a lot of guys are now going for their vacation.
yeah.
You know what I mean? So they're making money off the offside, because all these guys who are training out of there, it looks like a great place to take pictures at.
Yeah.
It's a great place to get your pads held at. So the investment has to, like I think just there's simplicity to certain things, and it's like treat guys right, put guys in there, put a good group of coaches in there, and then develop a team prior to developing a team. Because developing a team from the ground up isn't doable anymore, or isn't as doable anymore because there's already these powerhouses built. So you're either going to be Uriah Faber, and people are going to want to train with you, and you open up your own gym, and then you run your Uriah Faber gym, or you're going to be a coach that was working already with a number of fighters. They get a little bit of glory, and then they move in. And that's, I think, like Grudge MMA, right? Like Grudge Training Center. I'm not sure who's still there, but Gaethje's with can't remember the guy's name. Anyway,
The Trevor Whitman?
yeah, there you go. Whitman was with somebody else. I forget. Whitman was with Rufus,
I'm
I
not sure.
think.
Not sure.
So, but he had it, but he got a couple champions underneath him. He got a couple guys. He had, I think he had TJ. No, he didn't have TJ. Uh, let's bang. Anyway, you get a couple guys. You get Joe Rogan saying this is the best coach in the world. You just need that. You need Joe Rogan saying this is the very best coach in the world. You get that, and then you can open up a school, and then you'll get a couple fighters to come out to you, and then you build a plant around it.
Mm.
So I think for me, like right now, I'm traveling a lot. Um, my passion is still like kids. Like I still like teach. Like so, before I teach anything else, I want to teach a kids class
Okay.
because kids, for me, are when they're happy, when they're successful, when they do things right. Those are the most genuine human beings on earth.
Yeah, yeah.
Like when they're sad, they're sad. When they want a championship, when they're scared to go and compete and they're about to compete, you know it, you feel it, and they're honest about it. When they win or they lose, it's all honesty. And so when a kid is thankful that you're their coach, or that you're helping them, or that they're being successful because of you, it's all genuine, like like communication. You know what I mean? So I still love teaching my kids classes because also the little ones are super cute. And when they do like crazy takedowns, it's awesome to have like, you know what I mean? Like you see like a 4-year-old all of a sudden hit a takedown. It's like, oh shit. Like, you're like you're seeing if the other kid's okay. So it's like one of those like where it's very, very gratifying. And then I go into my adult classes and I teach my jujitsu classes. Sometimes I have amazing days, and sometimes you feel like there's a disconnect, or whatever there is, because when you're around the same students you've always been around, they're used to you. You know what I mean? Like when I teach a seminar, nobody's used to me and nobody's used to what I'm about to show them. And they're like, holy shit, this is great. I'm fucking excited. When you go teach your other students, you're like, hey, could you please make it here tomorrow? Could you come? Like I'm going to teach the same thing. I'm going to teach something else tomorrow that has to do with this. Could you come? And they're like, yeah. And then they're not there. You're like, fuck.
Yeah.
So there's that kind of like with fighters, it's a bit different because they're going to be there. If they're not there, then you already know that they're nobodies.
Yeah.
Nobody you want to be attached to. They may go somewhere, but you don't want to be attached to them because that's one of the worst things you can be involved in is somebody who doesn't like to work. Like who doesn't have that fire. Um, like I'm traveling up to Detroit to go see Jared Brooks.
Mhm.
This guy, this guy should be the UFC. He's in one. He's gonna win the one. He lost his championship, picked dude up, slammed him on his neck by accident. Guy had a Kimura and didn't let go of the Kimura. Stupid call by the ref. It should have been a no contest. Shouldn't have been disqualification because if you understand body mechanics, if you have a Kimura, you're going to rotate your own body,
Yeah.
right? When you get picked up. So he got slammed on his neck and got knocked out and they gave him the title. So he's going to fight this kid in February, which he already beat once. So he's going to likely beat the brakes off this kid. Um, And then there's like one has some really interesting fights. Like I do enjoy one a lot. They have some interesting fighters. It'd be interesting to see them be a bigger player. But I mean I understand the kind of hold they're in. Like when I went to Denver, Um, and it was really nice to see Muay Thai there. Like I don't like, I'm not a huge Muay Thai fan. Like I'm really not. Like I've watched almost zero kickboxing fights to a degree. Like I've watched everything from K1 when it was kind of exciting, and then everything got really fucking boring for a bit, and then one brought MMA gloves into Muay Thai, and
Yeah.
everybody's destroying everybody. But at the same time, I'm not as big a fan as you kick me, I punch you, punch kick, like that kind of like. I'm more interested in the gamesmanship of finding angles and guys trying not to be knocked out right away. Like
Yeah.
everybody there is trying to like destroy everybody in seconds, but they have a good culture, right? So that's the good thing that like that we're missing is the culture of losses are okay. You know,
Yes.
like that these top Muay Thai fighters in the world can get knocked out and still be one of the best ever in the world at that current moment. That they just let everything out the door. So that's a really beautiful thing to see with their with the way that Muay Thai fighters understand the sport of Muay Thai. They understand that like, hey, these guys are standing in front of each other, throwing knees and elbows. One of these guys is going to get knocked out, right? And it generally it's going to be the guy who's better, but not always, you know. So I think that was really cool to see. But with it'd be interesting to see one really pressure big fights in America. Like they're the I believe that they're the guys that could do what the UFC doesn't do, which is pay, which is what Pride did, is pay these guys to fight the best guy in the world. Like so, Jared Brooks, like I'm gonna go see him. I'm gonna work on some stuff with him. But he just fought at 135. He lost. This is probably the only fight he actually ever lost.
Mm.
Right? He's got three losses. One is from picking some dude up and slamming him on his head. The other one was he knocked himself out in a slam. The other one was he lost a split decision in Brazil to Division Figueroa, where he took the guy down 11 times, right? Slammed him four times and outstruck him, and then gets a fucking split decision loss to Division in Sao Paulo or something.
Yeah.
Uh, he lost it, but he weighs. Nobody understands this. He weighs 125 pounds,
Oh
so
wow.
he's actually 125 pounds.
Okay.
He fought at 135. The guy's coming down from 145. Had some kind of like staph infection or something. It was swelling up and different things like that. But that guy, his goal is a fighting champion. He'll fight at 135. He also grappled Mikey Musumeci.
Mhm.
Like, like this is people that are going to challenge themselves and put themselves out there. I think there's a good market for people that want to see people that are going to fight anybody. Good fighters that'll fight anybody. And I think that's very rare. And so I'd love to see, I think that they have some people on their stable that they could push. I definitely think there's guys like Rugrug and Jared, and they have some Muay Thai fighters that could transition to MMA. And it would just be interesting to see those guys, at least to see one kind of push more of a like what Bellator was doing
Yep.
for a bit. Bellator was putting on, like I don't care what you say, Kimbo versus Ken Shamrock was a fun fight
Yeah.
because who the fuck knows? Like I was in Kimbo's corner, and I didn't know. I was like shit, like this could be anything. You know what I mean? And so when you do fun stuff like that, I think people enjoy it, and like it does it matter who wins? Yes, but it doesn't matter because we're not watching it for that. We're watching it because holy shit, are these guys actually going to fight each other?
Watching it for the spectacle.
Yeah, well, not even the spectacle. Like there wasn't. So I think the Kimbo versus Dada was a spectacle,
Mm.
right? But the Kimbo versus Ken Shamrock is that you have a guy who is very good at a certain point, right? Ken Shamrock, who's a good grappler, right? Who was one of the best in the world. And then you got, I don't know who's just walked in my house, probably my parents. Uh, then you got yeah, I'm on the podcast right now. Okay. Uh, then you have a guy with one punch knockout power who's a beast for 2 minutes. What's going to happen? You know what I mean? And both of these guys don't like each other. So yeah, it's spectacle fights, but at the same time, it's I want to know why I didn't get to see Mirko Krokop fight, you know, when fight uh what's the guy's name I'm thinking of? Brock Lesnar. You know what I mean? Like why they were in the same they were in the same division during the same time. And you don't think that that's one of the best fights that you should put together? Like that's a fight. So it's they're spectacles, but they're also two guys that you know that are extremely dangerous fighters, and you put them against the people that they should be put against, rather than you worrying about a number next to them. You put them together for stylistic purposes, you know, because nobody's going to say Murgo Krokop shouldn't isn't one of the most dangerous strikers ever. If he kicks you in the fucking head, I don't care if he's Murgo Krokop from now or from later. He's still going to kick you in the head,
Yeah, he's
right?
still a scary man. Yeah,
And but no, he's not fighting for a title. But not everything needs to be a title. That's the problem I think with MMA is that everything is a title, and if we're gonna go at, if we're gonna always go after the title, then you're gonna miss fights.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
And there's so many fun fights that even that, like I say, they're not for titles, but the Colby Covington fight,
right?
that's a good fight that
Yeah,
is interesting to watch. It's not for a
yeah,
title, but it's still a fun fight to watch. Ian Gary versus Rachmanov.
right,
That's a good fun fight, and if anything, probably better than the title fight that was after it.
right, exactly.
So
I
yeah,
mean, that's
not,
yeah.
not always about the title.
You gotta at least appease the people that like fighting.
Mm,
And I think the people that like fighting are not necessarily the people that want to see, well, Marab versus Nurmagomedov. Yeah, that's what we want to see.
yeah,
But like that doesn't necessarily mean I need to see Duplessis versus Strickland.
mm,
It's what I'm going to see, but I'm not going to be stuck to my TV to making sure I don't like oh shit, we're going to miss it. You know,
yeah, yeah,
it's kind of stuff like that. Like I want to know why we're not going to watch Charles Oliveira uh versus Islam again.
yeah,
I really believe the worst fight for Charles Oliveira, or excuse me, Islam, is Charles Oliveira.
yeah,
Like what he did to Michael Chandler, even though he got like clipped and then punched in the back of the head a bunch of times, he was so dominant over Michael Chandler that there's no way you can say like, hey, Charles Oliveira is probably the most legit striking dude. Like he's out there out striking with the most dangerous guys and doing well. He just doesn't move his head,
yeah,
you know. And then on top of that, he's so dangerous on bottom
yeah.
that that's the best fight. I want to see that fight. Like Arman versus Islam, it's a good fight. I think Arman's problem is control.
Okay.
Right? So like Islam is going to control you. He's going to get on top and leg ride. He's going to try to do those things. And Arman is very good at scrambling.
Yeah,
And but scrambling doesn't mean that he's very good at controlling.
yeah,
So if he gets a takedown, is he going to keep Islam down? I don't think so. You know, like he's more into that burst double type shit. And like against certain guys, he's going to keep down. Against other guys, just not going to happen. You know, well, against Islam.
yeah, 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 yeah. So I've got one more question that I
Sure.
wanted to ask you. Are you?
You're gonna have to edit this a bunch. I bet.
Oh no,
This is where my brain is going.
I'm gonna throw it out. It's all good. It's all good.
Okay.
But uh, sorry, I'm just gonna grab my notes up. Uh,
Good.
oh yeah, here we go. So we've mentioned it a couple of times, and we've thrown out a few examples of it as well. It's basically like MMA evolves so quickly, and I guess you could say jiu-jitsu does as well. When you're coaching, how much time and effort are you putting into the real, I don't want to say basics and fundamentals, but I almost feel like the basics and fundamentals change quite a lot, particularly with MMA as well. So the things that were basic and fundamental 5 years ago have now evolved a little bit. How do
Yeah.
you keep up with that as a coach when you're teaching?
It's been. I mean, so it's difficult because you get in different rooms, right? So like the rooms you get into where there's guys at a high level and you're teaching something and it's like there's sometimes I'm in rooms that are high level and I'm shocked that some guys don't know it. Like they don't know how to do a head and arm triangle correctly. I mean, so I think watching kind of have an understanding of what the talent level is in the room, and then watching. I always like to watch guys first. Like I watch what they're doing, I watch what they're good at, I watch what they're terrible at, and then what I want to do is I want to make sure that when I'm there, I'm maximizing my time. Like so, most stuff I can teach, and that's where you get kind of the ecological approach, is that most stuff people will learn on their own if they already know this. So I either need to tighten something up or I need to open up an area that they don't have. So that was one of the good things of dealing with fighters, is that if I'm dealing with a guy with a D1 level wrestler, right? I don't necessarily need to teach him jiu-jitsu. I need to teach him the parts of jiu-jitsu that he needs to know so not to get for him not to get submitted. Right. So you kind of teach them that, like, so the basics are, don't let people put feet on your hips, right? They're going to change angles. So we clean feet off hips. We always want head over head, right? So there's no real submissions available. We want to keep our arms inside the bus, not outside the bus. Um, and then you kind of develop fighters like that in a certain way. But when you have a guy who's brand new, that's what I said. Like I go to guys like Joachim, and you go and you say, like, well, how are you creating beginner MMA fighters? Because the guys that I'm working with, I see something, I can watch them, I can see something like that they're not doing. That's something that they're not doing, but they're capable of doing, and I can add that to their repertoire. Like the fundamentals should be knowing how to fight on the cage, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're a good wrestler or not even a wrestler. If you understand the cage work more than the other fighter, you can take down wrestlers. You can stop wrestlers from taking you down. That cage itself is a art form of its own, right? It's almost like there's jujitsu, there's striking, then there's cage,
Mm.
right? And so usually when you already have a fighter, you have a guy who's ground already or striking already, but they're not cage. So you can develop that as a fighter. So I believe the fundamentals of fighting is like, okay, well, it's the basics. Feet on hips, how to ground and pound, how to strike, how to get into striking, how to get into takedowns off your strikes. Right? There's simple, these are things that are you should be repping all the time in your daily like training. But then I focus a lot more on cage work because that's the thing that we can control,
Yeah.
right? So like if I can put a fighter against the, if I can put any fighter against the cage, and I can teach those fighters how to get somebody down, then their jiu-jitsu takes over. Or I can teach them how to use the cage and hold that person up and use strikes and stuff like that. So it's that blending. So I think the fundamentals are more, how do I stay on top of things? I think I stay on top of things by watching trends, uh, using other coaches a lot of times to do the heavy lifting of their specialty for me, because there's a lot of guys I trust in. I mean, there's not a lot of guys I trust in. That's a complete lie. There's a guy or two I trust in where they are better than me in this area. I understand what's happening, but their simplicity of breaking it down and applying it as a lesson, they're brilliant at. Right. So I take, okay, well, that's what this guy's doing. This is something that I need to address with my fighters. And then you pushing things towards my heavy lifting, which is what I'm good at. So I try not to be outside of like a I try not to be a striking coach, right? I try to be a coach that knows that has a striking style, but can take a striker and develop him how to get takedowns or stop takedowns.
Mm.
I try to be I'm not a, like, I'm a jiu-jitsu coach, but I'm going to take my jiu-jitsu as how not to get submitted or how to get back up onto your feet,
Mm.
right? And then everything else for me is cage. So that's pretty much how I develop, like, at least I stay with the trends, is that I try to stay outside of the realm of what other people are capable of. I think that,
Okay.
does that make sense? Like what other people are capable of is good striking, good this, good that, cage work, I believe is the outlier
Mm,
a lot of times in fights, you know. So especially when you have two really, really, really good fighters placed together. So I think that's where I spend most of my time. It's because you can make that a striking fight against the cage, or you can make that a ground fight against the cage. But or if somebody's pushing you against the cage, you have to make sure that you're dominating that position.
mm,
Um, and so for me, yeah, I would say the fundamentals aren't even the fundamentals anymore. Does that make sense? Like you got to know how to do a high crotch.
mm,
You gotta know how to run the pipe. You gotta know how to slip a single leg. These are all things that don't necessarily change, but they the application you try to figure out the application of making the that event occur to where you're still benefiting. So like the guy's going to slip the single leg. How do you make that slip the single leg turn into something that's going to be beneficial from you? That's kind of like where I would say that was there's not fundamentals. It's where I see most fights happen and where most fighters need to have the ability to have either intuition or extreme knowledge.
mm.
And I try to build them in those moments. So replicating the high crotch to the takedown to a live moment, and then replicating, seeing exactly what the responses are continually, and knowing what the next best thing to go to is, or trusting my fighter enough that he's going to have the intuition to see something.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I'm finding as I develop more myself as a martial
Mhm.
artist is that I rely less on I used to rely heavily on going to the coach and going, okay, give me a technique for this scenario. And then I would
Right.
only use that technique in that scenario. Whereas as I've developed more, a really good example is like 2-on-1 arm defense against the cage, right? If I grab the other person's arm 2-on-1, it's really hard for them to do too much. Now I've started to use that much more in other scenarios in low
Right.
different spots that I would have never used it before because I hadn't been shown that. But as I develop, I find different areas to use that idea and that principle. So is giving someone a principle and then letting them play with that something that you also do?
Yeah, I think you have to simplify things for fighters because there's a lot to learn, right? So I like the simplification of something is that I have to rely on my fighter to understand that there's a couple different ways to escape from being on bottom against the cage, right? And I'm going to call out for several different things that I want to see. Like, I either want to see frames, I want to see their legs free. Like I don't want their legs tied up in leg rides. If I want to see, like palm on hand on hand, like so, like forearm on forearm uh, control, so that they can get their hips free. If they can control that arm relatively, they can escape back up to their feet. So there's like, okay, I give them that principle, but the truth is exactly what you're saying is that you develop concepts, you develop systems. So like we have an entire ride system, right? That goes from one thing to another thing to another thing. But I need those guys to be in that system so much that when things don't go exactly according to plan, they've been in that position so often that they have a feeling of intuition that works into a different position. So it's like, well, yeah, I don't have that, but that feels like this. And so when I move my hip and grab his shoulder, it's kind of the same. So I can hold that position for a time, get some strikes off, or at least control the position to where he moves to where I get a better position again. Like maybe I'm in like a loading period. Like I like to call a lot of the positions where you lose something. Like let's say I'm going for like a forearm Dagestani hand ride and they turn out before that happens. Right. So if I'm looking for the wrist ride and that guy turns, the last thing I want to let him do is get his back flat to the mat. Because if he gets his back flat to the mat, then he can get a half guard, right? And he can start turning into me and working his way up with an underhook. So the number one thing I want to do is I want to stop that back from going flat. So I think developing positions, so knowing that system is great, but then also helping my fighters understand the loading, like it's like pages loading, like where you are stopping that person from completing to a position of neutrality or offense. So when I'm going for that forearm ride, rather than his arm slipping free and me going to like a regular position, I want to hold his lat where his neck is and place my elbow and forearm underneath his back. So when he does go flat, it's almost like a doorstop. He can't go completely flat and he can't turn his hips because I've now taken up that residence with my arm. So once I have that place with my arm, he can't turn into me any longer, right? He can be on his side. He's not going to have his wrist controlled, but I'm going to be able to chip away. What I'm hoping on that loading sequence is at some point he's upset enough that he can't turn flat. He's going to go back to his elbow or turn again. Then I can go back to my series of leg ride and wrist control. But you can't let people completely out of positions. And so I think that's a lot of what people in MMA make the mistakes of is that you go, oh, well, he's on the back. And then if you lose the back, you're where? In guard, generally.
Yeah.
So when I'm working with people like Joakim and stuff like we're thinking, how do we? So I don't want my fighters on the back if they're not going to end up on top,
Okay.
right? So if you take the back, I need you to end up on top if you lose the back. So teaching my fighters the importance of the top hook over the bottom hook. Where in jiu-jitsu, we're taught the bottom hook is the control hook.
Mm.
Where in MMA, the top hook is the control hook because that's going to allow me to move my hips back on top. So in jiu-jitsu, it's not the fun thing because it's like, oh, well, you lost the back, right? It goes, well, that's the most important thing because I'm going to end up in half guard or top half guard. Well, there's several different ways that we kind of piece this together. But if I have it if I have my fighters understand the importance of concepts that aren't often taught, like they're just kind of skip through. And I see that all the time with MMA, like with fighters that if they had a little bit more further understanding of the importance of the position and how to stay in a midway position longer, they would they would not be on bottom getting hammer fisted. They would not end up falling over the guy when the guy pikes up. They would not lose the underhook. They wouldn't. There's certain positions. That's what I teach the most of for my fighters is if you do this, this is what's going to happen. If you stay behind the elbow, you will always have access to the back. So if my body's behind your elbow, I have access to the back at all times, right? So as long as I never let that concept out of my head and allow you to slip the elbow, I just stay behind you until something gets better and offers itself to me, you know? So there's like a lot of those kind of ideas where I call them like loading, is that a fighter can get to mount, but a fighter doesn't know how to keep mount or top position. And that's the problem. So that's why mount is dangerous for them
Yeah.
because they're not good enough to go for an armbar. They go for an armbar and they're on bottom and all of a sudden they lose it, or they go for a guillotine and they don't understand the next loading position from losing the guillotine. So like you're in a guillotine, you know the guillotine is not working, but then they let go. The head pops out rather than going to a loading position that's going to guarantee them either the back or it's going to guarantee them either a submission or it's going to guarantee them standing back up. Nobody's teaching their fighters, hey, I'm okay with you doing this as long as you 100% absolutely know how to get back to a beneficial position afterwards.
Yeah. This is why talking to people like you is so interesting to me because I've had I've had coaches that wouldn't be able to talk in the depth that you're talking right now in
Mhm.
terms of the systems that they have for their
Right.
fighters. And I spoke to a guy called Stefan Delaray, who's one of Dricus du Plessis' coaches,
Yeah.
and he was talking in a similar kind of vein to you. And we were talking about the importance of if you're going to send someone into a fight,
Mhm.
you need to have a depth of knowledge and you need to take your job seriously because you're
Yeah.
sending someone in to something that could potentially be life changing, you know?
Right.
And listening to you talk there, it sounds like you've really got an in-depth system in place of for each different scenario. You don't just kind of wing it.
Right. No, I mean, because that I think a lot of people go, well, like, oh, you're in half guard, elbows, elbows, elbows. And, but I want to look at, so what's going to be really interesting soon is that people are going to have statistics, more statistics than we're ever going to, it's going to change everything, right? That we know that more head kicks, more knockouts come from head kicks when they're set up with the right hand. We'll find out this stuff because there's going to be a huge like, summary of this stuff. At some point, the sport's going to become valuable enough to do that. Um, but I want to know, like, I want my fighter to be in control, and I want my fighter to know the positions that they need to be in to control the fight throughout the entire fight. And if we're in a position, if we're going to take a chance or if we're going to get taken down, we should know where we're going, but we should also know if we're on offense where that fighter is most likely going to go. So like if I can't control my foot, my opponent's hips, and he's immediately going to from palm to knee, and he's standing up, I need to know what the most often is going to be available for us from that position. Is it going to be a takedown? Is it going to be a knee? Is it going to be a kick? You know what I mean? Like, so which things are, so we run those scenarios so much that and I watch, of course, I watch a ton of footage, is where I see what's happening most likely. And then I want to get ahead of most likely. I want to get ahead of before that guy knows, before the guy, whoever we're going against, before he knows what most likely happens. I want us to already be in front of that. So us to already be loaded, for us already to be onto a deeper double, for us already to be like walking the cage for a knee, for us not to hold on to things too long and lose the opportunity for something else. I think a lot of people see that, and like I watched, like there's a simple explanation of controlling fighters against the cage and where your head position should be. I still see veteran grapplers with their head below the fighter's chest. That means 1000% your hands have to be involved. If your hands have to be involved, that means you're not striking, which means that that opponent can now use his hands to defend, right? He can use his hands to defend by pushing your head, by pulling his hips up, by doing any of those things, right? So if the fighter has that amount of ability of freedom, you have zero freedom because you're just holding on to his hips. You have to understand, like, okay, well, how do I free my hands? Well, your head has to be above his head, because then he can't come up because you're above him. So then the angle doesn't work. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
if the angle doesn't work, now I freeze my hands. Now I can start to use my legs to wrap up your legs and leg rides, and then I can start to my control position. So too many people are worried about keeping the hips on the ground and having their hands wrapped around the waist. Then they're worried about where their head position should be, but prior to that guy springing up, because he's going to spring up.
Mm.
So you have to be ahead of him somewhere else rather than trying to hold on to him. Or if you know you're going to lose him completely, setting yourself up for a strike that's going to be most valuable. What are most players going to do when they're on the right hip? They're going to be on the right hand to push up. That means that their right side is going to be available for a knee. Likely. You know what I mean? So those are the scenarios that and likelihoods that you have to look at as a coach that's coaching fighters that are good. Fighters that are okay, it'll happen, but there's a lot of stuff going on in their head, and you got to trust what you show your fighter and what they believe in, and then their intuition. And intuition only comes off of what you said right there, is that I kind of learned this works here, and this also works here, and this also works here, because it feels familiar. When
Yeah.
things feel familiar, your intuition kicks in, and your intuition is great. If you feel like there's just times like where I'm moving around, and I see, like, oh, that's the knee, right? It comes at a quarter of a second, but that's what you want your fighters to see. You want your fighters to see that, not you, because you can't yell it out in time, and you can't teach it in time. You can't teach intuition. You can only force your fighter into as many scenarios as possible to where that intuition is available.
Yeah, and it has to come from the fighter as well. They have to
Yeah,
have their own obsession
yeah,
and willingness to explore those ideas. And I don't think you can become a truly great fighter if you don't have that either.
right.
But
True.
yeah. Uh, Listen, man, this has been awesome. It's gone on a little bit longer than
Yeah,
you.
you can cut all the other stuff. The other stuff was not as great. This stuff was good.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
the whole thing's great. It's been really interesting talking to you. Is there anywhere that anyone can go to learn more from you? Do you have any links that you want to pe send people to?
Yeah, so if you're a jiu-jitsu person, then it's my school account. It's on my bio, school.com, Mad Lab, number 2, the word point, and then O. And then I'm working with Joakim on the MMA Mastermind school site, but we also have a subscription site that we're probably going to put all that stuff over. That's the winningcorner.com. And that's we have tons of stuff that nobody's seen before. It's insane. The amount of stuff that we have that we've been putting together, like it's awesome. So yeah, just go on my Instagram, go on people that I connect with, like with Joachim too. We're gonna be doing stuff together. Um, but yeah, if you follow me on Instagram, you're gonna get all the information for that stuff. If you want to pay for stuff that I make, that'd be appreciated.
It's always a good thing, right?
Yeah. Keeps me making it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.